Welcome to She Paid the Bills, the podcast that investigates, remembers and celebrates the women who made the movies. I'm your host Sophie, and today in our second episode we're going to talk about one of the most legendary and mysterious women who ever graced the screen, Greta Garbo. Star of classic movies like Grand Hotel, Ninotchka and Queen Christina, she's always been seen as the quintessential Scandinavian ice queen, although being Swedish myself I can assure you most of us are actually delightful. Garbo was all sharp angles and instant dismissal of what she deemed as people encroaching on her privacy. Her most famous line is, after all, "I want to be alone." Part of the mythos of Garbo, as I'll be referring to her throughout this episode, is that she seemingly disappeared from one day to the next, right after one of her most successful movies, Ninotchka. The truth is a bit more complicated than that, and a lot of it came down to her being branded box office poison. But let's start from the beginning. Greta Lovisa Gustafsson was born on September 18, 1905 in Södermalm, Stockholm. It's tricky to find concrete evidence of the events of her childhood, as many sources say different things. But based on the most reliable ones I can find, here's how she grew up. She was one of 3 children to parents Carl, who was either a sanitation worker or a butcher, and Anna, who was a seamstress. The family was already incredibly poor, and Greta's conception was unplanned. Her arrival put a huge strain on her family, who all lived together in a small apartment of just 1 room and a kitchen. However, 2 separate people, Carl's employer and a relative, offered to adopt the girl, but her parents vehemently declined both times. Again, sources differ on how her schooling progressed. Some say she graduated at 14 years old with good grades. Some say that by 13, Garbo had to drop out of school to help care for her father, who was in poor health. Now, this we do know to be true, as a year later, in 1919, he died of either kidney failure or the Spanish flu. After her father's death, Garbo found work in PUB, a clothes department store in central Stockholm, where she ended up featuring in an advert modelling what appears to be men's clothing, but maybe that's just a sign of time passing. This fascinating look at a young, carefree Garbo who looks like any other Stockholm shop girl is available on YouTube. It's not clear when she caught the acting bug, but in 1922 she had a small role in the movie Peter the Tramp and won a scholarship to the Royal Dramatic Theatre, which is to this day the top theatre and theatre school in all of Sweden. In a documentary about Garbo, a close friend of hers during her time at the theatre school discusses how her self-image began to change there. She says Garbo became convinced she needed to lose weight, and so would eat nothing but spinach. Her friend says she'd feel so unwell and sick, but became gammin and angular like she'd wanted, and stayed like that for the rest of her life. It was also during this time she met the man who was to become her sort of Svengali, Maurits Stiller. One of the top directors in Sweden, Stiller was of Jewish descent and originated from Finland. He lived in Russia and Poland before settling back in Finland as a child. He didn't have a happy childhood, to say the least. When he was 4, his father died, and shortly thereafter his mum committed suicide. Years later, Stiller fled Finland to escape being drafted into Tsar Nicholas II's army, as Finland was then an autonomic state ruled by Russia, and settled in Sweden to later become a Swedish citizen. He was one of the pioneers of Swedish cinema, starting out as an actor and quickly moving on to writing and directing movies of high acclaim. And that's how he met Garbo. He spotted her at the Royal Dramatic Theatre, and Stiller, who didn't like casting actors that were too educated in the art of acting, immediately spotted her potential. He wanted to take that potential and mold Garbo into not just a great actor, but a bona fide star. For example, it's generally accepted that he was the one who came up with replacing then Greta's last name Gustafsson with the enigmatic Garbo, believing it would look better on movie theatre marquees. He wasn't wrong there. He hired her to star in The Saga of Gösta Berling in 1924. Written by renowned Swedish author Selma Lagerlöf, who wrote a number of Sweden's finest movies of this era, it was a slam dunk success, especially in Sweden and Germany. After this, Stiller was to remain her mentor, agent, and, many believe, father figure for a number of years and across 2 continents. They travelled to Germany together, where Garbo appeared in 1925's Streets of Sorrow, cementing her as a European star. But when Hollywood came knocking, it wasn't to get Garbo, it was to get Stiller. Garbo and Stiller arrived in New York in 1925 when Garbo was 19 years old. Louis B. Mayer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, had been scouring Europe for new talent and wanted Stiller based on his work on Streets of Sorrow. Stiller agreed, but on one condition: Garbo was coming too. When they arrived at the docks, only one publicist and photographer were there to meet them, while many other imported stars got huge welcome committees and media coverage. Unsure of what their next steps would be, Garbo and Stiller were left on the East Coast without any word from the studio, until Mayer saw some artistic photos Garbo had taken of herself. Suddenly, he thought he could see a potential for star quality in her for the very first time, and sent for them both to come to Hollywood. Garbo being standoffish and disinterested in the studio culture and media circus isn't just a stereotypical joke. It was to some extent true. She struggled to enmesh herself in the MGM community, partly due to her lack of English. In her first Hollywood interview, she was quoted as saying, "I was born, I had a mother and father, I went to school, what does it matter?" Not exactly the scoop journalists dream of. After a few more interviews, Garbo felt her English-speaking skill was making her appear stupid and unable to get her thoughts across properly, so she stopped speaking to the press completely, which made them deem her as feeling as though she was above it all. Not speaking English did keep her isolated from casts and crews, but it kept her very close to Stiller, who spoke even worse English than her somehow. Despite these struggles, her first movies were immediate hits. Her first Hollywood film, The Torrent, in 1926, was to her dismay not directed by Stiller. In fact, they'd never worked together again. Stiller, disappointed by his experience at MGM, moved to Paramount but didn't fare any better there. He went back to Sweden in 1928 and would be dead only a year later. Garbo was devastated by his leaving, but she wouldn't be for long. In the same year her first American film was released, she met John Gilbert. Have you ever seen Singing in the Rain? Of course you have, but if you haven't, pause this and go watch it right now, then please come back. In Singing in the Rain, as it had in real life 20-odd years earlier, the arrival of the talkies wreaked havoc on the existing bank of stars who all had to prove themselves able to perform in what had before then been a purely stage-based style, with spoken word. In the movie, the huge star Lena Lamont is discovered not to have a voice for the talkies, to say the least, leading to hijinks for the leads, played by Gene Kelly, Debbie Reynolds, and Donald O'Connor. John Gilbert is often pointed to as the inspiration for a few of the elements of the movie, but especially the Lena Lamont character. Numerous documentaries and books claim that once put on film, his voice was found to be unmasculine and frankly embarrassing. But was that actually true? Let's take a short detour and find out. Born John Cecil Pringle in July 1987, Gilbert was the son of actors. We mentioned Stiller's awful childhood, but Gilbert's might be up there with the worst, alongside Clara Bow, who we will definitely discuss in the future. From neglect and homelessness to physical abuse and abandonment, his life seemed impossible to navigate from day one, and he appeared destined to live a life similar to his neglectful parents. But Gilbert was adamant that he would do better and be better. Starting out as an extra at the Thomas Inn Studios, Triangle Films, and KB Company, in 1921 he signed a 3-year contract with Fox Film Corporation, and the studio wasted no time changing his name to the more suave John Gilbert and featuring him as a romantic leading man after it was discovered that the ladies loved him. After negotiating an early release from his contract in 1924, he moved to MGM, where he would meet Greta Garbo. 1926's Flesh and the Devil was a success on its release, but today it's best known for sparking the flame between Garbo and Gilbert. Far from the cold, unapproachable ice queen she's so often been portrayed as, the relationship between the actors was by all accounts electrifying to watch. Friends from the time have spoken of how you could physically feel the pull they had towards each other when they were in the same room, and how they never had eyes for anyone else. Their romance quickly became highly publicized, and they were a well-known entity with the public. Their next film, an adaptation of Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, had its title changed to simply Love. Why? So the posters and advertisements could read Garbo and Gilbert in love. So in the midst of a career that seemed to only be growing in strength, why did Gilbert fall off the screen? In 1928, Gilbert signed a contract with MGM that made him one of the highest paid stars of all time. Gilbert didn't get along with Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM, and the two men would often butt heads. But Mayer wasn't exactly known for letting a moneymaker get away, no matter whether he liked them personally or not. But this toxic employer-employee relationship couldn't last forever, and the tension came to a head when Garbo and Gilbert planned to get married at a double wedding with actress Eleanor Boardman and director King Vidor. Despite always claiming she loved him, and without any word of warning, Garbo didn't show up to the wedding. Later, when Gilbert was in the bathroom trying to pull himself together, understandably crushed by the woman he loved abandoning him at the altar, Mayer walked in and said something rude about Garbo. What was said has been lost to time, but some think it may have been something along the lines of, "At least you didn't marry a whore." Gilbert, again understandably, knocked Mayer to the floor, and Mayer never forgave or forgot. It might also be good to add here that the response Gilbert is said to have made before knocking Mayer out is, "There's nothing wrong with being a whore. My mother was a whore." It's difficult to understand why Garbo didn't marry Gilbert. As far as we know, it was the closest she ever got. Some think it was because she preferred to be with women to men. Some think she never really loved Gilbert and got in over her head when he proposed. Reportedly, after her death, a friend of Garbo said she'd once drunkenly admitted that Gilbert had been her great love, but that she couldn't see herself married. She's reported to have said, quote, "I froze. I was afraid he would tell me what to do and boss me. I always wanted to be the boss." We'll never know exactly what happened between the couple, but despite this event, they remained close for the rest of Gilbert's life. By 1929, movies were pretty much universally expected to have sound, and MGM was keen to get its stars' voices quickly unveiled and accepted by audiences, minus Garbo's, but we'll get to that a bit later. Gilbert's first real leading man role in a talkie was the romance His Glorious Night. It did not go well. Gilbert's theatrical over-enunciation and the awkward script, if you've ever seen the "I love you, I love you, I love you" scene from Singing in the Rain, you know what I mean, meant audiences were left giggling and uncomfortable, not moved by his performance or wooed by him as a romantic leading man. At the end of the day, the romantic words he'd been saying all along in silence, when you could actually hear them, were pretty silly. The rumour is that Mayer set up Gilbert's downfall, forcing the sound technician on His Glorious Night to tweak Gilbert's voice to sound squeaky. But there doesn't seem to be any truth to this. For one, his voice in and of itself sounds fine. After the advent of sound, the kind of romantic, sweepingly adoring leading man Gilbert had excelled at had become uncool. It was this and not his actual voice that began his downfall. So let's get back to Garbo. MGM was, to say the least, hesitant to let audiences hear Garbo speak. They suspected her strong Swedish accent and gravelly voice were going to isolate audiences or, horrifyingly, make them giggle as they had at John Gilbert. Finally, over a year after the rest of the MGM stars had started starring in sound movies, Anna Christie became a sensation with the tagline, "Garbo Speaks."
Give me a whiskey, ginger ale on the side. And don't be stingy, baby.
Rather than ruining her career, talking had made her more popular than ever. In the following years, she would star in classic films like Grand Hotel, Queen Christina, and Camille. Sidebar: when making Queen Christina, Garbo demanded to have Gilbert play her male love interest, despite his star power being significantly less than hers at that point. He was at this point simply seen as a washed-up has-been. His role in Queen Christina didn't turn this around completely for him, but he was solid in the role and showed their mutual affection for each other even long after their relationship had ended. So with that, we've reached the late 1930s. Garbo is MGM's biggest asset. Talking couldn't stop her, and she was now one of the most popular stars the world had ever seen. Surely nothing can go wrong. Wrong. In the late 1930s, the Depression was in full swing in America, and as a business, it was more important than ever to consistently turn a profit. This was especially difficult for the studios, as going to the movies wasn't exactly a necessity. It ran the risk of becoming a luxury. In this climate, the main objection the Independent Theatre Owners Association was trying to get across when writing their box office poison piece wasn't about image, symbolism, or even good old Christian values. It was about money. Until now, Garbo had been pretty much guaranteed to make a profit at the box office. And while she may not have starred in as many films as her peers, she made up for it with the huge revenue her movies consistently made. However, when MGM assigned her to Camille, she protested, thinking it was too similar to her recent role in Anna Karenina. The only way she could be convinced to take the role was to also let her take on one she adamantly wanted to play, Maria Walewska, the mistress of Napoleon. Conquest was released in 1937 and co-starred Charles Boyer as the French conqueror Napoleon. It was a huge financial failure. In fact, against a cost of $2.7 million to make, it made a loss of $1.34 million. Putting aside other factors that contributed to this huge loss for the studio, Garbo demanded a salary of $250,000 per film, a considerable chunk of its budget. For contrast, Boyer only cost half of that at $125,000. This is clearly the movie that placed Garbo on the dreaded list. But was it fair? Until this film, only one other Garbo vehicle had lost money at the box office, 1926's The Temptress. But that had happened in her very first years at MGM, when she wasn't a huge star yet and their biggest moneymaker. And the loss was a comparatively meager $43,000. These days, actors seemingly fade away after one big failed movie. Look at Faye Dunaway after Mummy Dearest, and we'll talk about her more in the next episode. Alden Ehrenreich after Solo, a Star Wars movie, or pretty much anyone who played Superman after Christopher Reeve, for example. In early Hollywood, players had some more grace to fail. There are many reasons for this. 1, there were fewer big stars altogether. 2, they were salaried employees, not just sort of signing on for one film at a time, as we see quite a lot these days, although the studios did have the right to terminate their contract at any time. 3, studios had put a lot of money and time into building the stars. And 4, in a world without the internet and social media in particular, memories were shorter and news didn't always reach as far. Basically, one film flopping might be forgotten quite quickly. Despite these elements, at this time, Garbo was MGM's biggest star and she brought in huge amounts of money to the studio. Her losing her earning power was bad news. And then came the box office poison accusation. In the wake of a failed movie and the public accusation of being essentially an artistic money pit, MGM needed to shake up Garbo's image. She had been many things, a vamp, an aristocrat, a queen, but she'd never been a comedian. And knowing that her image until then had hinged on an icy distance that was no longer in vogue during the dreary days of the Depression, MGM decided to take a leap and do something unexpected. Have her star in an out-and-out comedy. Directed by comedy genius Ernst Lubitsch and co-starring Melvyn Douglas at the top of his leading man game, Ninotchka had all the right ingredients to be a hit. And it was. It's also one of my favourite movies, let's get into it. Cleverly using the tagline Garbo laughs, Ninotchka is a fun movie that showcases the old austere way of life that had been so popular in cinema until this point, but with one key difference. It was put through the lens of Soviet Russia, with key players shown criticizing and rejecting capitalism until they're inevitably seduced and almost set free by it. In it, Garbo plays a Soviet special envoy sent to Paris to enable the sale of some jewelry that had been confiscated from a former Russian Grand Duchess during the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Grand Duchess's French toy boy, played by Melvyn Douglas, jumps into the fray to win back the jewels, but is quickly enamored with the cold but visibly holding herself back Ninochka. Hijinks ensue, with Garbo playing a believable transformation from repressed to blossoming into her own person. In the end, the girl gets the boy in Constantinople, with Garbo first sent back to Russia and Douglas denied entry, and they presumably lived happily ever after. Ninochka was released in late 1939, with World War II just beginning in earnest, and was a huge international hit, despite not surprisingly being banned across the Soviet Union. After this, Garbo would appear to be at a high point in her career, with nothing but possibilities lying ahead. But somehow the opposite was true. Her career was about to end. Trying to cash in on a formula that had proven successful, as MGM did, 2 years later, in 1941, Garbo again co-starred with Melvyn Douglas in a romantic comedy, Two-Faced Woman. It bombed at the box office. There were a few reasons for this. Garbo herself felt the film was wrong for her and was embarrassed by the reviews she got. It was released shortly before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, meaning the United States wasn't exactly in a position to care about a romantic comedy. But most importantly, it's a pretty crap film. And with a bit of an anticlimax, that was that. Garbo never acted in a movie again. She never actually retired, but the right project just never seemed to materialize after Two-Faced Woman. At 36 years old, and after starring in 28 movies, she moved to New York to, finally, be left alone. In 1948, Garbo signed a one-picture deal with producer Walter Wanger, which would come to be La Duchesse de l'Anglais. But after running into a lot of issues in pre-production and finally losing its key financial backing, the project was scrapped. All that remains of this project is a screen test Garbo filmed in 1949, which proved that even a decade on from Ninochka, her last successful movie, she still had the beauty, charisma and star power she always had. But it wasn't to be. Garbo lived another 50 years, but she never made another film or granted another interview. She was infamous for going on daily walks in Manhattan and could often be spotted bundled up and wearing large sunglasses window shopping. On April 15th, 1990, in New York City, Garbo died. Like millions of people before me, I've always been fascinated by Garbo, not least because she was one of the first Swedish people to make a go of it in Hollywood. She's one of the true mysterious stars that survived the transition into talkies despite all odds. She made some of the best films Hollywood's ever seen, and yet she was able to just let it all go and slip away after a couple of failures when she felt she was done. As much as legend says she was the great unapproachable ice queen, I do wonder if she really was just a bit shy, unsure of how to behave in a world so far away from the one she came from, and whether she truly just wanted to be left alone. Thank you very much for listening to She Paid the Bills. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating wherever you're listening right now. Pass the word on to everyone you've ever met, and follow us on TikTok and Instagram on She Paid the Bills Pod. Next time, we'll dive into the multi-decade career of the unstoppable force that was Joan Crawford. See you then.